The development of human beings takes place inside social institutions. It takes place as between people in the context of human interactions, the family, the school, the peer group, the youngsters who hang with each other in the neighborhood and play basketball or whatever. These institutions of human association are the places where growth and development occur. Many resources essential to human development, the attention that a parent gives to her child, for example, are not alienable. For the most part, human developmental resources are not commodities. Development is not up for sale. There are no markets on which you can trade it. What I mean is that the structure of connections between people within society creates a context within which developmental resources are allocated to human beings. The allocation of those resources may not be fully responsive to prices, a distinction that I drew between racial discrimination and racial stigma. Discrimination is about how people are treated, stigma is about how they're perceived. I argued that what I call reward bias is now a less significant barrier to the full participation of African Americans in U.S. society than what I called development bias. Reward bias pointed to the differential treatment of persons based on race in formal transactions, thereby limiting the rewards that African Americans might receive for the skills and talents they presented to the market, sort of thing that Patrick was referring to in his introductory remarks. By contrast, development bias referenced impediments that block access of persons in a subordinate racial group to the resources that are essential to develop skills and refine talents. So reward bias rests on a foundation of racially discriminatory transactions, whereas development bias, in my mind, is rooted ultimately in racially stigmatized social relations, since many resources that foster human development only become available to persons as a byproduct of informal, race-influenced social relations. And I'm going to come back to that point at length momentarily. Obviously, these two kinds of bias are not mutually exclusive. Skill acquisition can be blocked by discriminatory transactions, and a regime of market discrimination that is under pressure due to economic competition may require for its maintenance employing the instruments of informal social control. Still, this distinction is useful, for whereas the moral problem, and my emphasis here is on the moral philosophic dimensions, whereas the moral problem presented by reward bias is straightforward and calls for an uncontroversial remedy via laws against discrimination, development bias seems to present a subtler, more insidious moral problem and may be difficult to remedy in any manner that is likely to garner majoritarian support. This difficulty, I think, has both a cognitive and an ethical dimension. From a cognitive point of view, observers may find it difficult to distinguish between blocked developmental opportunities and limited capacities or distorted values when seeking to understand a group's poor social performance. In terms of ethics, many citizens who find the transactional discrimination associated with reward bias to be noxious may be less offended by the often covert and subconscious relational discrimination that underlies development bias. That is, they may object, for example, when police officers treat black youth unfairly, but say nothing at all when white families move away from a racially integrated residential community because of their imagined fear of the threat they perceive from black crime. So now, perhaps you can see what I'm after with that mantra. Relations before transactions. I'm pointing toward the idea that the subordinate position of blacks in the economy can be thought of as deriving from our stigmatized status in the society and not the other way around. Stigma inhibits blacks' access to those networks of social affiliation where developmental resources are most readily applied. Today's problem is not so much a race-influenced marketplace or administrative state refusing to reward talent in African Americans or to accord us an equal citizenship. Not so much that, as had been the case in decades past. Rather, today's problem, I'm claiming, is mainly a race-tinged psychology of perception and valuation that at some level withholds from blacks the presumption of an equal human worth. I know that that's a heavy thing to say. It bears the burden of having evidence to support it, and I have no evidence to present to you tonight. I just want you to know that I'm aware of the burden that I take on. A racial group's stigmatized status in the social imagination and in its own self-understanding may be reinforced, justified, and socially reproduced as a result of that group's subordinate position in the economic order, thus creating a vicious circle. Here we have a world where notions of racial dignity, racial inequality, racial subordination, racial inferiority, racial honor, or pride, or shame resonate powerfully. Such has been my world. For those very notions about honor, dignity, equality, pride, and shame have been central to my own biography. I will return briefly to this personal theme at the very close of this lecture. First, however, let us consider some basic facts about what has happened to the relative status of African Americans in the United States over the past half century. It's not a pretty picture. I have this presentation. You can see that I'm setting up the a review of some descriptive data that I want to undertake. I don't want to go through the slide. We're more than half century down the road from the civil rights movement, and we remain with an enormous challenge. You might note that bottom bullet, my challenging thesis, racial bias ideas inherited from mid-20th century, not adequate to understanding the current problem, and moreover, and more pointedly, remediation of human developmental disparities inhibiting blacks' full participation in the modern 21st century economy is more crucial. So I had actually prepared exactly the talk that Patrick Bolton alluded to. I was going to talk about selective associations and about collective reputations, but I've decided in the interest of quickening our encounter here tonight and moving us into the realm of a serious engagement with the ethical challenges that the society faces, that I would forego some of that technical discussion in the interest of, as I say, putting the issues as starkly as I can. But I do want to review these trends, and these are just some data that have been culled together showing time series in constant dollars of various measures of economic status, comparing black and white Americans over a period of 40 years or so after the late 1960s. That's median income of households headed by black and white non-Hispanic Americans. You can see that there's a substantial disparity and there's no tendency toward convergence in that series. Those are the wage and salary earnings of, again, non-Hispanic, native-born black and white men and women. Again, you can see that the wage gap for men is substantial and doesn't show any tendency toward convergence. These are medians, so you know, I don't want to put too much on that. This is somebody, Employment Policy Institute's effort to estimate median wealth holdings by households. There's a substantial disparity, as you can see. Home ownership rates, again, a substantial disparity. These are poverty rates by race, comparing blacks and whites in the United States, some closing, but a substantial disparity. Poverty rates by age, you can see there under 6 years old. Some 42% of African American children are living in poverty, according to the Employment Policy Institute. These are unemployment rates. Blacks is the line at the top, fluctuating over the course of the business cycle, but substantial disparity is a persistent feature of the U.S. economy. These are college graduation rates. It's starting to get a little boring saying that the lines are separate, they're not converging, and they're substantially distinct. This is a crude effort at social mobility. Again, the Economic Policy Institute report that I relied on for this, showing the proportion who move from the top fourth, from the bottom fourth of the income distribution to the top fourth over the course of their, as children to adults, comparing blacks and whites. You can see there that outward mobility from the bottom fourth is much higher for whites, and downward mobility from the top fourth is, remaining in the bottom fourth is much more likely for blacks, and moving up to the top fourth, much less likely. There are other indicia that we could look at. This table is pointing to the proportion of children by ethnic group in 2007 living with married parents, with a female spouse only, whatnot. You can see there that only about 1/3 of African American children are living with married parents. Births to unmarried mothers, percent of all births to unmarried mothers. You can see what you can see there, upward trending for both blacks and whites, but a substantial disparity that shows no tendency toward convergence. Abortion rates, and so on. I'm actually going to stop and return to my text because I don't want to spend too much time on this. These are the National Association for Educational Progress results in 2007. It's been a while. The below basic is the dark blue proportion of the children. These are now fourth graders, and this is a reading achievement test who are below basic skill level, and that's the dark blue, and the white is who are at advanced level, and you can see the racial differences there that are palpable. That's also true at the 8th grade level, and so on. Let me find a, and then there's incarceration, and one could say a great deal about that. But I'm going to, in the interest of our time, I'm going to move on with my presentation here, with my talk here. What, I ask, is a humble African-American economist to make of these unlovely facts? So I'm going to begin by saying a little bit about what I mean by racial stigma, a little bit more. To do so requires me to talk a bit about human capital and social capital. In my PhD dissertation, which was 41 years ago now, I used the phrase social capital and got lucky. Because in his important treatise published in 1990, the great sociologist James S. Coleman, the book was called The Foundations of Social Theory, credited me, as having been among the first to do so. I'll be contrasting social with human capital. I'm doing this to make what could be a long story very short. And I know I'm speaking to a room of economists, so I probably don't even need to say this, but in case there's somebody out there who's not an economist, I'm going to go ahead and say it. In human capital theory, the paramount question is, how do we account for differences in the earnings capacities of persons in society? What's our theory as economists as to why the distribution of income and earnings looks as it does? Why are wages paid to workers in this occupation greater than that? What, in a market setting, is the relationship between a worker's remuneration on the one hand and activities undertaken by that worker which enhance productivity, effort on the job, formal and informal training, delayed childbearing, migration, investments in health, and so on? This approach to explaining how people come to get whatever reward they get in the labor market is what I mean by human capital theory. The theory builds on an analogy with well-developed theories in investment economics, well-developed theories of investment in economics, assuming competitive markets, rational choice by forward-looking individuals, and analyzing human decisions in light of an agent's time preference, anticipated rates of return, and available alternatives for the use of time. So human capital theory takes this intellectual framework, well developed in economics for understanding investment decisions at the firm level, and imports it into the realm of studying human inequality. Now, put simply, what I have been doing in some of my theoretical work over the years is exploring the implications of the fact that an association between business, a connection between business investments and human investments is merely an analogy, and that's a long way from it being an identity. That is, I've been questioning this tendency to equate the mechanism of investment as it pertains to machines, to firms making plant and equipment decisions, for example, with investment as it refers to the development of human beings. Important things are missing in the human capital framework I maintain, and there are 2 points here that I want to emphasize. My first observation is that all human development is socially situated and mediated. That is, the development of human beings takes place inside social institutions. It takes place as between people in the context of human interactions. The family, the school, the peer group, the youngsters who hang with each other in the neighborhood and play basketball or whatever. These institutions of human association are the places where growth and development occur. Many resources essential to human development, the attention that a parent gives to her child, for example, are not alienable. For the most part, human developmental resources are not commodities. Development is not up for sale often. There are no markets on which you can trade it. What I mean is that the structure of connections between people within society creates a context within which developmental resources are allocated to human beings. The allocation of those resources may not be fully responsive to prices. As a result, it may not always be a good metaphor or a good analogy to reason as though this were so. The family is one such institution. The point is absolutely fundamental, since the human development process begins before birth. And the decisions about whether or not a mother attends to her health and nutrition during pregnancy in order to encourage the neurological development of the fetus are decisions that will be affected by whether the mother comes from a family with resources, whether a husband is present, whether she's 16 or 26, whether supportive social services are provided, and a myriad other thousand things that I could name, all of which come together to shape the experience of this newly born, maybe not even yet born infant, who will develop one day to be a human being, about whom it will be said that they have this or that much productivity, as reflected in the wages that they'll make in the market or the test scores that they'll manifest on some paper and pencil examination. It will be said that they manifest this or that much productivity. Well, what I'm saying is that they're not machines. The productivity they manifest, the capacities that they express, are not merely the result of some mechanical infusion of economic resources. They are the byproduct of a social process.